Okay. Hi, welcome everybody. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for joining us for another Parsha Shavua exploration with all of you. This week's Parsha is Parsha Mishpatim, and may the zchut of our learning together tonight be a zchut for anybody who needs it. Refuah shlema, needs a Yeshua, I hope from Hashem, and may it be a week of bracha and of Shalom Yisrael for all of us. So let's take a look at Parshat Mishpatim, and I want to begin with a slightly different way. I want to introduce the Parsha. So we've had a lot of amazing opportunities to read incredible stories. Certainly all of Sefer Bereshit with story after story, with so much depth, with so much color, with so much messaging, moral messaging, ethical concepts, showing us how our forefathers led their lives, our foremothers became sources of inspiration. And then we transitioned into Sefer Shemot from the very beginning. The story of the enslavement of the Jews in Egypt, the story that we repeat every single year. We repeat it actually every day, multiple times. Every time we say the Shema, we end the Shema by remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim, which is a fundamental event in the creation of the Jewish personality. That's why we mention it so many times. And then we reach, of course, Matan Torah, a reminder to all of us that the goal of liberating the Jewish people from Egypt was not to liberate them from hard work. That itself was not the goal. And that's why we have a 49-day period that we count from the second day of Pesach, and we count till the 50th day, and we celebrate a holiday at the end of the 50th day. That holiday, of course, is Shavuot, corresponding to the historical moment of God's revelation at Har Sinai. The point, of course, is that the idea that we count the days between Pesach and Shavuot is in and of itself a message that the two are inextricably linked. The purpose of taking the Jews out of Mitzrayim was for them to accept Hashem at Har Sinai and to become Hashem's chosen people with a very, very profound mission to teach the world. So last week's Parsha was Yitro, where the story of the Jewish people centered around a mountain and God's revelation spoke to them. And then we transition to this week's Parsha. So I've tried this series of Shiurim this year to begin with a sort of little overview of what's in the Parsha. So Parsha Mishpatim is going to be very different. It's not going to be a narrative. It's not going to be stories. Certainly not the type of Sefer Bereshit, and not even the type leading up to this point in Parsha Shemot, and Sefer Shemot. It's really a Parsha filled with halachot or mitzvot. So, following last week's Parsha of Aseret Hadibrot, Hashem legislates a series of laws for the benefit of Bnei Israel, the Jewish people. And what's included in the series of laws in Parshat Mishpatim? Laws of slavery, laws of loans, laws of showing people who've been given responsibilities to watch the property of others, and the idea of what happens if damage happens while under the watchful eye of each one of the four categories of showmen, watchmen. We talk about mistreatment of foreigners. We talk about seasonal holidays. We talk about agricultural gifts that were to be brought to the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. And we also talk about the prohibition of cooking meat with milk. And we introduce the mitzvah of prayer. Altogether, in Parashat Mishpatim, there are 53 mitzvot. That's a lot. 53 mitzvot. 23 mitzvot, which are positive commandments, and 30 which are prohibition. 53. God promises to bring Bnei Israel into the Holy Land, and he warns the Jewish people that once you get to the Holy Land, you have to make sure that you're not going to adopt and emulate the ways of the pagan, the idolaters that currently occupy the land of Israel. It's in this week's Parsha, Parshat Mishpatim, that maybe two of the most famous words quoted in all of the Torah The Jewish people respond to God's offer by saying, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then the word nishma, of which there is some disagreement, but I'm going to say it this way, we will do and we will hear. Moshe, according to Parsha Mishpatim, goes up on Har Sinai, and he leaves two people in charge, Aharon and Hur. Moshe goes up, and he stays there for 40 days and 40 nights to receive the Torah. And that is a nutshell summary of Parshat Mishpatim. So it's not filled with stories. So it's filled with a different sort of revelation. It's laws. And I think for some, that may seem like a letdown. How interesting and how compelling and how attractive are the rich stories of Sefer Breshit and Sefer Shemot up until this point. And then we get to Parshat Mishpatim with 53, one after the other, listings of laws. And I just wanted to stop for a second and just think about that with you and just make sure that we're approaching this hopefully with the right frame of mind. Now, I deliberately try to suggest that in some ways this is a letdown. And maybe it is from a literary perspective. It doesn't have the same sort of literary tension and drama. But I think it's important that we realize that all of the Torah, certainly the stories, but even the legal sections, of which this is clearly one of the most important, it actually forms so much of civil law. Parshat Mishpatim is the source of so much civil law that the Gemara later expands upon. But I think it would be a mistake, a mistake of attitude and interpretation to consider that Parshat Mishpatim is less engaging. I think we need to somehow just pull back the curtain a little bit to understand that what is law? Law is also one of the ways in which God reveals himself to the Jewish people. This is the way in which Hashem says, I want you to create a society based on the values that I think are important. And this is how you're going to build your society. I'm going to take the values and I'm going to construct a whole network of laws. And the purpose of these laws is to govern your behavior. But in governing your behavior, what I'm really intending to do, this is, I think, again, the philosophic foundation of these laws. What I'm really intending to do is to create an environment in which the principles that God wove into the creation are brought to the forefront. So it's not just pedantic, it's not just detail after detail. In some ways, of course, this is how you take a big idea and you make it relevant. So the Ten Commandments, which sound like they're such huge ideas, of course they are, but huge ideas have to somehow find a way in which they become relevant to the listener. A huge idea needs to have the framework in which it is implemented on a regular basis, a daily basis, and that's what Parshat Mishpatim is intended to do. And one of the interesting things about it, and I mentioned this in the nutshell summary of Parshat Mishpatim, is one of the two of the most famous words ever quoted in the Torah, Na'aseh v'nishma. So these words are taken often as being an expression of the Jewish people's willingness to embrace the Torah. Na'aseh v'nishma. So we will do, and we will. Now here's where they get some debate amongst the Meforshim, amongst the commentaries. What does the word nishma mean? So nishma can refer to a more physiological term. We will hear, but most of the Meforshim say it doesn't make sense that Jewish people are saying, okay, we're going to do, and then we're going to have this physiological response called listening or hearing. Not likely. So what does it mean? We will listen, and according to others, we will understand. There's going to be a undertaking on the part of the Jewish people to delve into, understand, and connect to the meaning behind this. But it's important to understand and to recognize that the first of the two words is naaseh. Naaseh. And the reason that's important, especially in light of the Aseret HaDibrah, is I think that the message behind these two words is this. When you come to think about the Jewish religion, and you come to try to explain what it is, it would probably be an inaccurate description to say that Judaism is a faith. wait a second. Why is that inaccurate? We are one of the major faiths in the world, correct? I mean, there's Judaism, and then from Judaism sprang, historically speaking, Christianity, Islam. Okay, well, I get there may be other religions in the world, but it's not incorrect to say that Judaism is faith. And I'm not saying it's incorrect, but it certainly isn't a sufficient translation. Why? Because of na'aseh v'nishma. Na'aseh means we are a religion of doing, of deed, of action. And that's so much more important than what you believe in. Now, I know that sounds weird. It's not that exploring faith doesn't matter. Now, I'm the one that talks a lot about it, and I'm always promoting parents talking about faith and raising questions of faith with their kids and having conversations amongst ourselves because I think that's really an important topic. We're living in a time, a generation where I think questions of faith are not discussed often enough. But the point that I'm making is that Judaism believes at its core that far more important of what you believe is what you do. What you do. What are your actions? What is your behavior? What determines when people watch you and see you? What evidence is there that you are a faithful Jew? And I'm using the word faithful. What does a Jew do to show that they believe in God? They're not closing your eyes and shuckling and thinking, I believe in God, I have emunah b'tachon. That obviously it's important, but what will distinguish you is the way in which you lead your life. That if somebody were, as it were, to follow you and watch you on a daily basis, they would watch the way in which you engage with people, the way in which you integrate Torah into your everyday life, the way in which you conduct yourself in a manner which is consistent with Hashem's expectations in the way you treat people in your business, in your home, in your family, the way, excuse me, you conduct yourself in religious affairs between you and God, what you eat, what you drink, how you eat, how you drink, how you pray. All of those things is the evidence that shows that you are a Jew. So Parshat Mishpatim, which is filled with 53 mitzvot, positive and negative, more than just being, oh my gosh, here comes that list of do's and don'ts that Judaism is famous for. You know, you got to do this, you can't do that, you got to do this, you can't do that. We don't see it as a list of restrictions. We don't see it as a list of impositions that God places upon us. We see this as an opportunity to integrate God's presence into our lives through a structured form. And for most people, I think, for most people, structure matters. And it gives us the direction in our lives that brings meaning. For most people, the unstructured life is one that is much more complicated. Just two examples, then we're going to move on actually to the Parsha. Shiva, which God forbid, everybody should be spared from having to suffer a grievous loss. But one of the things that Shiva does, it structures the mourning process. And therefore, we know exactly what we have to do. For those who are not, I'm going to say, fortunate enough to have that, they don't know how to grieve. And very often the grief is never really dealt with and remains as some sort of unresolved sadness below the surface that appears in other parts of a person's life. But halacha is different. It tells us, do this, don't do that, go here, don't go there, stand up, sit down, cover the mirrors, sit on the floor, tear your shirt. All of these things seem to be restrictions, but through the restrictions, we come to deal in a psychologically healthy way with the reality of our life. That's how halacha guides us. And I think the second aspect, and this is one of the mitzvot that I mentioned before, which actually does come up in Parshat Mishpatim, as elsewhere as well, is the notion of prayer. If you were to ask people to pray to God and say to them, you know what, don't worry about it. You just often say whatever you want, however you want, it's on you. I think, and maybe this is a result of the modern age in which we live, I think most people would have a problem with that. I don't think most people would be comfortable with that. And I've heard that from people saying, I don't know what to do. Actually, I was watching a fascinating podcast interviewing a couple who were born not Jewish and who had obviously talked about their conversion process. But one of the things that they did talk about was their experience of learning about prayer and how uncomfortable it was when they didn't have any guidance for prayer and how liberating it was to receive a sitter with a book full of prayers that often helped them channel a lot of their religious feeling in a manner that was easily expressed. And I think for a lot of people, that's true too. If you were to say, Dovin, like, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. But when you say, okay, here's the guideline, and then offer them the opportunity in addition to this guideline, you have the opportunity to add your personal prayers. I think for many, that's much more meaningful. So Parshat Mishpatim, again, while it's a list of 53 mitzvot, not all of which we're going to study tonight, I think the framework is to see it not as just, oh, more things for us to do and not to do, but as really an opportunity for us to find meaningful expressions of our relationship to God and how that relationship to Hashem liberates us in a certain way. Okay. Having said that, let's begin. So if you're using a Chumash, that's amazing. If not, you don't have to worry. I'm going to begin Perek Chaf Aleph, chapter 21. And so after a very dramatic, after a very meaningful story of the revelation at Sinai and the Aseret HaDibrot, and you can just imagine the scene as the Torah describes it, the kol shofar, the clouds, the sounds, the overwhelming feeling of being in God's presence. And now we get with a list of 53 mitzvot. I don't know whether you imagine, so what should be the first set of mitzvot? I don't know, something that somehow reflects the drama of the moment. Maybe it's a mitzvah about God. Maybe it's a mitzvah about Shabbos. Maybe it's a mitzvah about belief in God. Maybe it's a mitzvah that should talk about our relationship to God. Here's the first mitzvah. Here it is. Ki tikneh eved ivri shesh shanim ya'avod uvashvi'it yetzei lachofshi chinam. I'm going to translate it. If you buy a Jewish bondsman, he shall work for 6 years. 6 years. And in the 7th year, he shall go free for no charge. If he shall arrive by himself, he shall leave by himself. If he is the husband of a woman, his wife shall leave with him. If his master will give him a woman and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to the master, and he shall go out by himself. I'm not going to read more of it. It's not that much more. That's the first mitzvah in Parshat Mishpatim. How to manage having Jewish slaves. What? It's so not what you expect that you have to pause, take a step back and say, why this? Why this? Why did God see it necessary of all the different things to start Parshat Mishpatim? 53 mitzvot. And maybe amongst the 53, there may be some that you would say, that makes a lot more sense. That ought to be the bridge between Parshat Yitro, Parshat Mishpatim. But no, we're beginning with the story of the laws of Jewish slavery. Okay, I want to share an explanation offered by the commentary called Oznaim La Torah. So the Oznaim La Torah, by the way, was a Holocaust survivor, moved to Israel. And in his commentary, the author suggests something I just want to stop and think with you about, because I find this to be a fascinating supposition. And I'm going to read part of it and translate. And this is what he says. HaTorah yarda lesof da'ato utchunotav shel adam. In answering the question why the Torah sought to begin Parshat Mishpatim this way, he says the Torah really understood the depths of a person's thinking and qualities. Ki kol yetzer machshavot libo rak ra kol hayom. Because, as was described earlier on in the book of Breshit and Parashat Noach following the flood, Hashem makes a very dramatic assessment of human nature, that there resides in all human beings this sort of element of a turning to evil, much in a quick blink of an eye. Yetzer machshavot libo rak kol hayom, that the nature of a person's disposition, conscience, is easily swayed to the negative all the day, all the time. The ha'eved shel hayom, and the slave of today, shekibel mara al shibud, that accepted slavery upon himself. V'davar gavoa al shivyon v'al achayut ha'amim. So what the Oznaim Torah is suggesting is this, quite a bold statement. Yeah, we know about the slavery in Egypt. We know how terrible it was. We know the stories. We know how bitter it was. We eat maror because it was so bitter. We eat charoset to remind us of the mortar into which the blood of children was mixed. That's how brutal, how savage the Egyptians were in dealing with them. So wouldn't you think that after having been liberated, all the Jewish people would say, after having gone through this experience, we know what it's like. And one thing that we're going to undertake is to be a more ethically driven and more sensitive nation than any nation on earth. Why? Because we know what being a slave was like. We lived it on our bones. We watched our children suffer. We laid our grandparents to rest. We know. And so if anybody is going to be more cautious, it's going to be us. Says the Oznaim Torah, that's not really human nature. And Jews are humans. And there is actually this notion, says the Oznaim Torah, that the Torah wants to say, listen, this is part of the way in which human beings operate, that we all need constant reminders. And that because of that, we're going to begin Mishpatim with this notion of, at the very core, we need to understand what our basic instincts may be, and the Torah wants us to overcome them and to govern ourselves by this framework of rules that guide us and make us into better people. But we need to understand that at our core, Jews are not typically different in our structure than anybody else. We have the same human DNA, about which God said in Sefer Bereshit, when he created the human race, he said, yes, everybody has a Yetzer Hara, all of us. And we're very likely to fall prey to our Yetzer Hara. That's just the way it is. And so even though we had this experience, it's not beyond belief that not too long after we left, we could, in fact, deteriorate and slide deeper and deeper into something that is inappropriate and untoward. I mean, I think that if we take a look at human nature, I think that probably is true in the cycle of human history. Some sort of traumatic event happens, and you think forever we're going to be changed. This will change us forever. And it never does. It never changes anybody forever. And it's true for the Jewish people. You would think, for example, that after October 7th, which was preceded by an unprecedented level of civil discord in Israel and arguments and religious strife that we haven't seen maybe since the time of Korban Beit HaMikdash, and then October 7th happened, and you would think, oh my gosh, that's going to be a lesson that we all will have learned. There's no question that after we all came together, the people all over the world, Dati and Natuti, Chiloni, Mizrahi and Haredi and Sfardi and Ashkenazi and Taimani, everybody came together with this extraordinary effort to build bridges and to do things for each other. It will never go back to the way it was. Never, because we've had this trauma thrust upon us. I don't know if it's never going to go back. I think that there are so many arguments now in Israel about whatever subject, and I'm not questioning whether the sides of the argument are good or not. What I'm pointing out is that the arguments have returned, and the vitriol in some ways has returned. And so it may not be, says the Oznaim Torah, it may not be so crazy to think that Hashem is in fact talking about laws of slaves as a way of introducing this notion that, you know what, we need to remember our weaknesses and our deficiencies in order to chas v'shalom never slide back. Okay. I'm going to skip a little bit there. As I said, there's 53 mitzvot. It's going to be hard to sort of just pick out one or two, but I'm going to do that. I am going to pick a few in about that 35 minutes that we have left, 35, 40 minutes. Okay. Perek Chavbeit. I'm going to skip to chapter 22 and Perek Chavbeit, Pasuk Chafei and Chavvav. Okay, let's skip to Perek Chavbeit, Pasuk Chafei and Chavav. Excuse me. Im chavol tachbol salmat re'echa ad bo hashemesh teshivenu lo. Ki hi chesuto levada, ki simlato le'oro, b'mei yishkav, v'haya ki yitzak elai, v'shamati ki chanun ani. If you take your fellow's garment as security, meaning, so somebody needs to borrow money from me, okay? I'm prepared to lend money. But I want some sort of security. I'm going to give you $1,000, and I want a security to make sure that you pay me back. So the Gemara, the Torah says that if the security, because the person really doesn't have much, so he gives you an article of clothing. Here, take this article of clothing as a security. I will return the money to you. You have you have my clothes. If you take your fellow's garment as security until sunset, shall you return it to him? For it alone is his clothing. It is his garment for his skin. And what should he lie down? So it will be that if he cries out to me, if the person who lent the money refuses to give back the security, refuses to give back the clothing, even if he hasn't paid the money back, according to the Torah, come sunset, you have to give the security back. You can't keep the borrower's clothing as security. For if he cries out to me, so if the person who owns the clothing, the borrower, cries to God, he's not giving me my clothing back, I shall listen, says God, for I am compassionate. So that God here, Hashem is warning that if the impoverished borrower cries out for help because he doesn't even have clothing to go to sleep, he's that poor, that the only thing he can offer of value, is clothing. He can't even lie down and cover himself up. So he turns to God for help. Hashem will heed his cry and hold the lender accountable for failing to return the collateral, the security. So, ki chanun ani is how this pasuk ends, these three words. I am compassionate. The Midrash halacha called Mechilta on this book in Sefer Shemot says the following: Berachamim barati et olam. Hashem says, I created the world, but I created the world out of or with compassion. I created the world with compassion. So when it says ki chanun ani, according to the Mechilta, the interpretation of those words is because I created the world with compassion. Rabbi Yehuda Leib Ginsburg, a name that you've heard me speak about quite a bit, in his commentary to the Torah called the Yalkut Yehuda, explains that the Mechilta presents the reason for why the Torah issues this command requiring lenders to return each day, every single day, you got to return the security, the collateral taken from a poor borrower. So what's the Mechilta say? Strictly speaking, the lender, I give you money. It's my right to say, okay, I want some assurance that the money I give you is going to be returned. I have a right to ask for security. That's industry standard. You have that right. You're not an evil person for asking for security. So the lender is entitled to keep the collateral which he rightfully received as his security for his loan. No question about that. The very purpose, that's why you have collateral, is to pressure the borrower to repay, right? I have the money. I'm giving my hard-earned money to somebody who needs it. I'm willing to do that. But I also want my money back. And so one of the ways in which I apply pressure in a legal and accepted format is you give me security. And you know that I'm holding on to the security, so that's like an incentive for you to give back the pay back the money, so you get your item back as well. But here's the point. The Torah demands that the lender return the collateral each day. Why? Ki chanun ani. Because the world's very existence depends upon compassion and graciousness. Because that's how the world was created. The world's existence depends on compassion. So God created us and he sustains us with kindness. If you think about it, like why do we wake up every day? What does God owe us? God owes us nothing. God is the ultimate power. He owes us nothing. So why do we wake up? We woke up because of God's kindness, that God feels that it's a good thing for us to be in the world. He doesn't need us, that's for sure. So if he doesn't need us, why does he sustain us? That's God's compassion. And we may not even deserve God's compassion, but we are the recipients of God's compassion. And if we are the recipients of God's compassion and we recognize that God extends compassion to us, this pasuk is telling us that we have to do the same for other people. We shouldn't be demanding from others everything that technically we deserve. That sometimes we ought to take a step back and yield and give up a right that we have, in some ways, to compromise. There are times when we are entitled to make certain demands, but the principle of ki chanun ani teaches us that we've got to be forgiving and flexible. And that's so not always easy. It's not always easy. I'm telling you that. Like, sometimes I daven in the morning, not at church, I go to an early meeting somewhere else. And every single day, almost every single day, there's a series of Mishulachim, mostly from Israel, not exclusively, who come and they ask for handouts. They ask for tzedakah, they ask for support every single day. And sometimes these people come in the beginning of the week and they come back at the end of the week. And then sometimes it's just new faces all the time. And sometimes I try to be conscious of my own feelings and say, is this a nuisance or is it not? Or is it an opportunity for me? Meaning they come to get money because they need it. Maybe this is really an opportunity for me to be more compassionate and not look at it, oh, what? Why do they always need so much money? Maybe it's an opportunity for me to say, wow, this is a chance for my quality of compassion, my quality of chesed to be strengthened. So that takes a little bit of a reframing of my thought process, as opposed to saying, why are you always here? It makes me upset. And you've all heard stories like this. My brother-in-law told me, so I think I've quoted this before, that he was davening somewhere and a meshulach came and the person beside him started berating the meshulach who came from Israel and said some really strong things to this person about why they're not going to give them money. You don't join the army. You don't take responsibility to support the Medina. Why would I give you money? It's not right that you ask for money, but you don't do your share. And this guy didn't want to give money. So eventually this person came to my brother-in-law, who is a sweet guy. He's a really able guy. And he started talking to this person. And as many of them do, they have all sorts of documents that they like to bring out and to share. So we pulled out some pictures. And in the pictures, he was in his IDF uniform years ago. And he showed what he was doing while serving in the army. We make all sorts of assumptions, which are not compassionate and they're not kind. And the way in which we want God to turn to us, because it's obvious that Hashem owes us nothing, but we want God's kindness. So if we're asking God to treat us in a kind manner, then some of the mitzvot in Parsha Mishpatim are opportunities for us to demonstrate to God Look at me, God. Watch my na'aseh. I got it. I heard the message. I'm going to conduct my life in a manner which shows you that it's worth your being kind to me because I learned the lesson and I'm being kind to somebody else. Halavai. Halavai, we become that society where we are hanun and we are compassionate to other people. Okay, let's do a little bit more. 1 second. In chapter 23, Parakav Gimel, again, I just want to remind everyone there's so many mitzvot here, but I'm going to do Parakav Gimel Pasuk Dalet. Parakav Gimel Pasuk Dalet. What does it say? Here it is. I'll read a couple psukim. Ki tifka 3 and 4. I'll start with 3. Ki tifka shor oyivcha o chamurot to'eh hashem tishivenu lo. If you are walking along, of course, don't forget, Torah is describing a society, a community, which was much more agricultural than is urban and obviously not technological. So encountering all sorts of animals in the course of one's day, one's week, one's livelihood is so totally natural, which of course becomes not only specific to that situation towards getting halacha in that situation, but it becomes paradigmatic in other situations. So if you encounter an ox of your enemy or his donkey wandering, you shall return it to him repeatedly, meaning that you see that this donkey appears to be lost. There's no rider, there's nobody leading it, and you recognize it is belonging to your enemy. So usually you don't do things to help your enemy. I mean, after all, they are your enemy. But the Torah says, no, if it is your enemy, you still have to return this lost animal. If you see the donkey of someone you hate crouching under its burden. So the first case was a case of a lost animal belonging to your enemy. The second case is the case of somebody who you hate, not necessarily your enemy, but the person whom you dislike, you hate, has put so much of a load on the donkey simply can't stand up and is sort of now fallen to its knees, crouching under its burden. Would you refrain from helping it? So you hate this person, the donkey is fallen down because the load is too heavy, and you now have that moment where you have to decide what to do. You look at the person and you know him. Oh my God, do you know what he's done to me? What he said to me? What he said about my mother? What he said about my kid? I'm going to help him. But really, it's the donkey that's suffering, not him. So would you not stop and help the donkey? No, you shall help repeatedly. It may take more than one time. Rabbi Yisrael Meir Cohen Kagan is more affectionately known by the name of a book that he wrote, one of his first books, which was on Lashon Hara. And he quoted a pasuk in Tehillim, Mihu Ha'ish Chafetz Chaim, who's the man who really loves life? And the rest of the pasuk, Netzor L'Shancha Meira Usmatecha Midaber Mirma, person who watches his tongue and speaks no evil, who speaks no lashon hara. So this pasuk became synonymous with the book, and the name of the person of Yisrael Meir Cohen Kagan being synonymous with the book, and so he became known as the Chafetz Chaim. Died in 1933. I don't know if anybody saw. I don't know how many years ago now. Wow, maybe 10 years ago, but there was like an 8-second movie, the only movie clip that we've seen. If you look this up on YouTube, you will find it, of what the Chafetz Chaim looked like. He was accompanied by a whole bunch of people. He was attending a conference, and I can't remember where the conference was. I'm sorry, but it's see the Chafetz Chaim. It's not just a reputed person. There he was. He was a very short man, by the way, very short man, but obviously of a tremendous status. So the Chafetz Chaim is drawing our attention to the pasuk, which says, so you're walking along and you encounter the animal of your enemy and it's lost, to'eh. The pasuk says, hashev tishiven lo. You are obligated as the finder to return this lost animal to its owner. And here the Chafetz Chaim, who never shied away from being not just a arbiter of Jewish law, by the way, he's also the author of the Mishnah Brura, which is the commentary on the first section of the four sections of the Shulchan Aruch that covers and governs the religious life of a Jew every day, every week, every month, every year. It covers so many things from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, Jewish holidays, Shabbos, a lot of different things. Anyways, but in his comments to the Chumash, Chafetz Chaim al Torah, he says something that I find striking, especially in the capacity of the work that I'm currently doing. And here's what he says. Im chasa haTorah kol kach al mamono shel Yisrael. If the Torah establishes laws to return lost objects to people because it's concerned about the property of another person, meaning, what do I care that an animal is lost? What do I care about anybody else's lost property? It's not mine, so why do I care? The Torah cares about the value of objects. The Torah cares about a person's property. So if the Torah cares about a person's property, even an animal that was sort of got lost and strayed far away from its owner, then here's the words of the Chafetz Chaim: Kol shekain shetzarich lerachem al hanefesh hayisraeli. Then certainly all the more so that he has to have compassion on the Jewish soul. Shetoeh min haderech, who has lost his way or her way, afilu im yitztarech amel rav lahashiva. Even if you have to work hard to return this lost soul to the proper path. And then Ube'emet Bizmaneh says, and truthfully, in our time, again, he died in 1933. Afilu chotim gemurim matsui berubam shenam lachis. Says so many of the people, Jews, who are sinning, are not doing so because they're trying to do this on purpose, God forbid. Rak to'im b'derech, they're lost. Al eza poshim shemat'im otam, because of all sorts of influences, negative influences that lead them astray. They're just like the lost sheep that's described in this pasuk. Doesn't know. The animal doesn't know how to get back to its master's house. It doesn't know. He says, and that's a true description of the state of so many Jews today. And it's a great mitzvah to have compassion on these people, and to show them the proper path. And like it is said in the Tanakh, and you should teach them the path that they should follow. The Chafetz Chaim is talking about what we see is our obligation to the huge amount of Jews around us who have no connection to the Yiddishkeit whatsoever. Is it our business or is it not our business? And I know that word kiruv has so many connotations, not all of which are positive. I get it. But even if you sort of took kiruv out of the equation, you didn't talk about as kiruv. If you see a Jew who has no connection to Yiddishkeit, so there's a couple of ways in which we could respond. We could respond by saying, well, I'm going to show you respect. What do you mean you show me respect? I'm not going to get involved. It's your choice. I respect your choice not to be connected to the Jewish people, not to be connected to the value of Jewish belief. It's up to you, Gesundheit, do whatever you want. That's one approach. Or there's another approach. And the Chafetz Chaim says, but if you will return a lost object because you felt some sense of obligation or responsibility to the owner of an object, why don't you feel the same sense of obligation or respect to a person who was created by the ultimate owner, God? And it's a powerful comment that the Chafetz Chaim is making. We live in a very polarized community, unfortunately, where everybody somehow often takes a step back, and we don't want to get too involved lest we step on somebody's toes. And yes, it's true that some people would say, no, I don't want any of this. Okay. At that point, you don't do anything. But from what I have seen and in my environment that I'm working at, certainly with the demographic of 18 to 32-year-olds, wow. So many of them completely disconnected, secular homes, no background, but they're so interested. They want more. They want meaning. And I think it's true not just for the 18 to 32-year-olds. I think it's true for a lot of people. Not everybody's capable of sort of making the changes, of sort of making moves to sort of get back to their Jewish roots. Not everybody can do that. But we're not talking about, according to the Chafetz Chaim, on their readiness. It's on our readiness just to say, hi, would you be interested in anything? If you are, I'm happy to talk with you. And it's a fascinating thing. You just think about it. Um, I'll end with this. I'm not here to be on a soapbox. Um, what we know from American statistics is that out of every 10 weddings in which a Jew is involved, 10 weddings, marriages in which one of the partners is a Jew, at least one, 7 involve intermarriage. 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10 weddings that involve a Jew are intermarriages. That's a pretty that's a statistic which is incredible. And so, okay, that just could be a statistic, and we just have to live with the consequences. Or what? Or we say, no, maybe that's not a statistic I'm okay with. Maybe that's not a good sign for the Jewish people. Maybe, especially now, in the world in which you and I live, maybe now we need a different response. I don't know if anybody read the article by Bret Stephens, in which he said something I think really, really powerful last week. And his point was, we're spending way too much time talking about anti-Semitism, way too much time. Forget trying to pump all this money into fighting anti-Semitism. It's not going to work. So what should we pump our money in? Like, what should we do? And Bret Stephens said, I think we should pump our money into Jewish education. Teach Jews about being Jews rather than try to stop anti-Semites from being anti-Semites. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Let's teach Jews about being Jews, and let's worry less about stopping anti-Semites from being anti-Semites. Okay, I'm going to continue now. Let's do a little bit more. So as we talked about this pasuk about giving, making sure that we act in a compassionate way towards the person who we lend money to, Torah says the following, and I just want to make sure that we think this just a little bit deeper with the help of a commentary. In kesev talve et ami, et he'ani imach, lo tihye lo kenoshe, lo tesimun alav neshech. When you lend money to my people, to the poor person who is with you, do not act toward him as a creditor. Do not lay interest upon him. So just to speak that out, again, what that means is, so if somebody borrows money from me, borrows $1,000, then I should expect $1,000 back. I should not expect $1,000 plus interest back. It is asur, is forbidden for a Jew to charge another Jew interest. But here is where I just want to go back and take a look at the language again, because I think the language needs to just be unpacked a little bit. So the verse says one more time, in kesev talve et ami, if when you lend money to my people. Now we all grow up about think and know the significance of the mitzvah of tzedakah. We all know that. So why doesn't the Torah just say that when you give tzedakah outright, and don't charge interest? See, the point of this pasuk is to distinguish between the mitzvah of tzedakah and this mitzvah. What's the difference? Isn't tzedakah the key mitzvah? Well, there is a deficiency in tzedakah that is taken care of in the context of this pasuk. What's tzedakah? Tzedakah is charity. And of course it's a mitzvah. And we're told to do this mitzvah. But just because we're told to do the mitzvah doesn't mean that there's not a higher level than this mitzvah. What do you mean? If this is a mitzvah, then it's a good. Of course it's a good. But consider for a second, according to Rabbi Ari Levin, who's the author of the commentary called Hadrash V'Ha'iyun. In his commentary called Hadrash V'Ha'iyun, he says, I recognize that tzedakah is positive, but I also recognize that there's a deficiency in tzedakah. What's the deficiency? The deficiency is how the person receiving the tzedakah feels about themselves. Nobody wants a handout. A handout just sticks a knife deeper in me. It shows me how a nebuch I am. I couldn't do enough. I wasn't capable. I needed help. I'm a lo yutzla. Other people have to give me their money in order for me to sustain myself, sustain my family. That doesn't make anybody feel good. That's not good for my self-esteem. It injures my self-esteem. It casts me down. So what's better than that? What's better than that is this pasuk. In what way? Because it's a loan. I'm lending money. And why is that better? Because I'm maintaining self-respect of the individual, the receiver. It's not a handout. You're going to have to pay it back to me. I'm not going to charge interest. I get it. But I'm expecting it back. And if I'm expecting it back, it means I expect more of you. And when people expect something of you, it fills you with a sense of self-respect. It's not that people look at me as a lo yutzlach. Lo yutzlachim don't have any expectations upon them. It's just their handout and people give them. That's tzedakah. But when you lend money to somebody, it's according to the Rambam and the best ways of giving. This is one of the best ways of giving the guy a job. But if you're not able to give the guy a job, but you can lend him the money, then obviously it's one of the ways in which you are demonstrating that his self-respect is important. And sometimes we don't always carefully enough take into account what it feels like to be on the other side. One of the hardest moments for me, and I know it's going to sound silly, I don't know if anybody's ever tried this, but so today in a lot of places, when you go to supermarkets, you get a shopping cart. Sometimes the shopping carts are chained one to the other, you know what I'm talking about? And you have to slip a coin into this mechanism to release the chain so you can take the shopping cart and go up and down the aisles. Some places it's a quarter, some places it's a loonie. Okay, it doesn't matter. So I went to one of these places and I needed to do some shopping and I didn't have a quarter. I didn't have a quarter, 25 cents. It's just a quarter. But I needed to do the shopping and I knew that I had to be somewhere. I needed to come home with the food and I didn't have a quarter. And it was not possible for me to just go, and collect the items like this. I needed a buggy. And so I asked somebody for a quarter, a total stranger. I'll tell you something, that was very hard to do. To go up to somebody and say, listen, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed. I don't have a quarter. Do you mind giving me a quarter? If I see you, I'll give it back to you. If not, I'll just leave it and wait for somebody else who needs a quarter to use my buggy for free. But it's not an easy thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do. And that's just 25 cents. But just imagine if it's not 25 cents. Imagine if it's a whole bunch of zeros and you can't afford things. It's a tough call. It's a very, very tough call. So I think the Torah wants us to remember that in the context of the mitzvah of chesed, tzedakah is important, yes, but it's not the highest level. It's not. The highest level, the higher level, is lending a person money so that they have their self-respect still protected. Okay. Okay, I see. Oh, my goodness. Sticking with the author of the commentary called Hadrash V'Ha'iyun, I want to close with another explanation that he gave to a different section, the very end of this Parsha, which, again, I think he makes us stop and think for a second. So while, as I said, the overwhelming majority of this Parsha is mitzvot, 53 mitzvot, 24 in Perikav Dalet, Pasuk Yud Zayin, there really is a brief sort of a little bit of a story, a little bit of a recounting of something that happened. And it's worth taking a look at. So here's the story. I'm going to read the whole section. Moshe ascended the mountain. Again, we talked about Moshe going up to Har Sinai. Now remember, Hashem gave the Aseret Hadibra to the whole people. Moshe was not on the top of the mountain. The 10 Commandments were recited. with everybody standing around the mountain. Hashem recited the Ten Commandments, and after the Ten Commandments were done, then Hashem called Moshe to go up on Har Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. Moshe ascended the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of Hashem rested upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for a 6-day period. He called to Moshe on the 7th day from the midst of the cloud. The appearance of the glory of Hashem was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop before the eyes of the children of Israel. Read it in the Hebrew. Umar'eh kevod Hashem ke'esh ochelet b'rosh hahar le'inei b'nei Yisrael. So here's an image. There's image of a fire. So again, nothing is coincidental. Every image in the Torah is deliberate. Everything that Hashem does is obviously thought out. And then, if that is the case, so what's the significance of Ke'esh Ochelet? Is it just, okay, it's a fire? Or is there a message here that the image itself, the choice of the image, the choice of fire as being a image is something that we need to unpack a little bit more. So I want to share with you what Hadrash Vayun Levin suggests is one of the explanations about the reason why Aish is significant here. So Aish is an interesting phenomenon in the world, and it's double-sided, isn't it? Aish is one of the key elements that really promoted civilization. Aish was a tool by which so many positive things were brought to human society. There's no question about it. But Aish is also that very same force which can be immensely, enormously destructive. You just take a look at the California Palisades fire that destroyed huge communities. And we think about how Aish is this sort of non-discerning force that wreaks havoc and destroys things. But on the other hand, of course, just think about all the beautiful things that we have in the world because of Aish. Look at all the glassware. Look at all the warmth that comes into our homes. Look at all the light, like all of the things that Aish does on the one hand, which are positive, and all of the things on the other hand that Aish does, which is negative. So this duality of Aish is something that Hadrash Vayun Rabbi Logan thinks about and suggests that one of the messages that the Torah is trying to tell us in the fact that that's what Bnei Israel saw when they looked up, they saw an Aish, excuse me, has a lot to do with a duality of sort of knowledge, meaning Moshe is going up on Har Sinai, and the purpose of his going up on Har Sinai is for him to be told and taught this huge, enormous body of information called the Torah. He's going to come down and teach it to the Jewish people. And so as this mysterious experience is unfolding for Moshe on Har Sinai, there's this notion of Aish. So there's an ocean of this image of fire that is somehow connected to an experience that Moshe is having in acquiring so much knowledge that he will later come down and impart to the Jewish people. So why is the positive negative side of fire an appropriate associated image with the idea of acquiring knowledge? And Rabbi Lewin suggests that we need to sometimes stop and think about, is all knowledge that we acquire positive? Are there harmful experiences that can emanate from acquiring certain types of knowledge? Is knowledge by definition positive? Is there everything to learn in the world a benefit that enriches us, that makes us better people, stronger people, more faithful people, more moral people? Or are there things that we can learn that actually are not so, that they harm us, that they confuse us, that they encourage us to do things that we may not want to do? Is every act of research, every topic to be researched, one that should be embraced or not? And that's a really provocative statement. And his answer, of course, is no. That's why the image of fire is used, because according to Rabbi Lewin, that's precisely the point. is that some knowledge is indeed to be embraced and should be promoted and followed through, but there may be some which are not. And that's something I think that a Western liberal education, Western liberal thinking would say no to. That the idea of telling a person, no, we better not study that, is like closing off their minds. It's almost like an notion of self-inflicted censorship. And why would that be good? But I think Rabbi Lewin is trying to tell us that we need to pause before we jump to any conclusions and ask ourselves the real question. Is all knowledge positive? Or can there be a type of acquired knowledge or information that could be harmful? And is everybody adept at knowing the difference? So are there some people who you would be willing to teach certain types of knowledge to, and other people not? Are all children to be exposed to all sorts of knowledge? Or would you say, no way, I don't want that. I'm not sending my child, and at what age would you say this, to such and such a place because I'm concerned of the experience they're going to have and whether or not they are going to be exposed to something which could harm them intellectually. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about that, but I think Rabbi Lewin is in fact urging us to do that. And he's basing it on this pasuk. And that's why the Torah uses the image of fire when it talks about fire in Har Sinai. So there is a fire that builds and a fire that destroys. And Hashem is surrounding himself, as it were, with this fire because he wants us to understand that there is a certain type of knowledge that we should embrace because it's positive, it promotes growth. But there is the other type that does the opposite. So here at Son, Hashem should give us the strength, the wisdom, the insight to know which is which, and to make the decisions that take boldness of character to protect ourselves from those things. I think we certainly see what it's like living in a society with worldview, which we do believe sometimes is harmful, and we don't agree with it. But how is it? What would we need to do to stop our children from becoming convinced that some of these ideas are right when we believe deeply that they're flawed and maybe even clearly anti-Jewish? It's definitely something for us to think about. I want to thank everybody for joining this year tonight. Please feel free to unmute yourselves. I'm happy to hear your thoughts, as we always do about this. And let's see. Oh my goodness.
Thank you. It was very educational.
Thank you. Well, I
It's
appreciate
always,
you saying that. I really
always.
thank you. Oh, thank you. I try. I like ideas. I know so do you. And there's so much always, even in a parsha that seems to be very dry when you just read it one mitzvah after the other, one halacha after the other. But if you stop and think about some of the things behind the words, but some of the ideas, they're very deep, and they carry a lot of thought behind them. A lot of thought. What did you think about the idea about some ideas should be out of bounds and some things we should not spend time analyzing and researching? How do you feel about that?
The first thought that came to my mind was the atomic bomb.
How so? Explain, Rhonda.
Well, it has the potential for mass destruction, which is a horrible thing, should it ever go off. But on the other hand, it also has the potential to keep everybody in line.
You mean as a deterrent?
Yeah. So, and that's like a vast scientific knowledge, I think, that's behind it. So is it a good thing or a bad thing? Like my first instinct was to say, yeah, it's a bad thing, but then maybe it's a good thing.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, I thought you were going to say that atomic power as a source of power can do a lot of good for society, but
That too.
it was chosen to be this first implementation was mass destruction.
So it led to something good.
It could have.
The
It could
knowledge.
have.
Yeah.
That's Marei Haish. That's precisely the point. The fire that
Yeah.
promotes and the fire that destroys. Exactly.
Yeah.
But what about ideas? Like, are there, would you go into a liberal college where you know that there is strong anti-Israel, anti-Jewish sentiment? Would you send a child who's a 19-year-old to a university campus where you want him to get an education, but he's also, or she will also be exposed to a lot of liberal, and I'm not using liberal as a criticism. I'm just saying as an observation. Would it be okay to do that? Would you be worried that your child, who you invested a lot of money by sending into Jewish schools, would be challenged and would maybe end up no longer being connected to his or her Jewish life because they're now involved in an intellectual environment which is anti-Jewish? It's
Well, maybe not with the right tool, maybe with the right tools.
okay.
And who's to say that it's not worse to put them into, let's say, a secular work environment where they're going to be exposed to drugs, for example?
So I hear what you're saying. We all of us, well, most of us at some point need to work for a living. I get it. I get it. It's true. These are tough questions, but these are the real questions. People make these decisions or have to make these decisions a lot of times. And we ask for God's guidance in this and ask for siyata d'shmaya, where we need God's help so that the decisions we make bring blessing and God forbid, not the opposite. Chas v'shalom, chas v'shalom.
It used to be that hospitals had ethics committees.
Don't they anymore?
I think it's questionable what the ethics are these days
Well,
because
that's it. Yes, that's an example of that, Rhonda. Yeah, because what happens there's our ethics, and then there's the ethics of the hospital, like medical assistance in death, which
yep.
is definitely promoted. I just somebody I know, his mother passed away at the age of 102, and she needed to be hospitalized, but she had dementia. So he went to visit into the hospital, and he noticed that the hospital had stopped doing anything for her and essentially was starving her to death because they were not offering her any nourishment or nutrients or nothing. And they called that nature taking its course. Well, nature taking its course means when you starve a person to death, the outcome is going to be they die. That's the natural course of events. But he felt that what they were doing was unethical, and he didn't want that. He didn't want that. But nobody asked him. That's what they felt was the right thing to do. So when you talk about ethical choices, it just represents a different view of things. So yeah, Torah is telling us that we need to be sensitive to and aware of the fact that there are different intellectual and ethical forces in the world, and some of them burn, some of them can hurt. Thank you, everybody, for joining this year tonight. May there be a week of blessing and simcha and refuah and Yeshua for the Jewish people, whoever needs it. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody, Mi'atzah Hashem, next Tuesday for the next Parsha. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. All the best. Stay well.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.